The morning Sarah Elizabeth Morrison turned 14. She never imagined it would be the last birthday she'd celebrate in her family's sprawling colonial mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut. 6 months later, she stood shivering on the front steps of that same house, a small duffel bag clutched in her trembling hands, watching her mother's cold eyes through the frosted glass door. "Please, Mom," Sarah whispered, her breath forming small clouds in the December air. "I have nowhere to go." Victoria Morrison's voice came through the intercom, crisp and final. "You made your choice, Sarah. Now live with the consequences." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The electronic lock clicked, sealing Sarah's fate. Sarah had always been different from her older sister Madison and younger brother Trevor. While they excelled at tennis and piano, attending exclusive prep schools and charity galas, Sarah preferred reading in the library's window seat or helping their housekeeper, Maria, tend the vegetable garden behind the pool house. Her parents, Victoria and Richard Morrison, tolerated what they called her peculiar interests, as long as she maintained the family's pristine reputation. The Morrison family owned Morrison and Associates, one of Connecticut's most prestigious law firms, established by Sarah's great-grandfather in 1923. Their name appeared on hospital wings, scholarship funds, and the society pages of every major publication from Hartford to Manhattan. Victoria served on the boards of 3 different charities, while Richard had been mentioned as a potential candidate for state attorney general. Sarah's pregnancy had been discovered during what her parents thought was a routine doctor's visit. For persistent fatigue, Dr. Patricia Henley had been the family physician for 15 years, delivering both Madison and Trevor. The blood test results that November afternoon shattered the Morrison family's carefully constructed world. 14 weeks, Dr. Henley had said quietly, her usual warm demeanor replaced by professional concern. "Sarah, honey, do you understand what this means?" Sarah had understood perfectly. She'd suspected for weeks but had been too terrified to voice her fears. The father was Jake Callahan, a 17-year-old from the public high school across town. They'd met at the town library during the summer reading program, bonding over their shared love of fantasy novels and classic rock music. Jake worked weekends at his uncle's auto repair shop and dreamed of studying mechanical engineering at the State University. Their relationship had been secret from the start. Sarah knew her parents would never approve of Jake's working-class background, just as they disapproved of every friendship she'd attempted with kids from ordinary families. The few times she'd brought home classmates from her private academy, Victoria had found subtle ways to discourage the relationships, scheduling family obligations or suggesting activities that required expensive equipment or memberships the other families couldn't afford. The confrontation with her parents had been swift and brutal. Richard's face had turned purple with rage, while Victoria had retreated into an icy silence that somehow felt worse than screaming. "Do you have any idea what you've done to this family?" Richard had demanded, pacing their living room like a caged animal. "The Morrison name has been built over 4 generations. 4 generations of hard work, reputation, and respect. And you've destroyed it all for some grease monkey's kid." "His name is Jake," Sarah had whispered, but her words were lost in her father's fury. "I don't care what his name is. This ends now. You'll have the procedure done quietly. We'll send you to boarding school in Switzerland for the remainder of the year, and we'll never speak of this again." But Sarah had refused. Despite her youth, despite her fear, something deep inside her rebelled against her parents' cold pragmatism. She thought of the tiny life growing inside her, and of Jake's gentle hands and kind eyes. She thought of the conversations they'd shared about building something real together, something different from the hollow perfection of her family's world. "I won't do it," she'd said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I won't get rid of my baby. That had been 3 weeks ago." 3 weeks of locked doors, monitored phone calls, and her parents' increasingly desperate attempts to change her mind. They'd offered bribes, made threats, even brought in a psychiatrist who'd suggested Sarah was having a rebellious phase that required intervention. Through it all, Sarah had held firm, even as her world crumbled around her. Madison, home from Yale for winter break, had barely looked at her. Trevor, only 12 but already showing signs of their parents' cold pragmatism, had started referring to her as the problem when he thought she couldn't hear. The final straw had come when Sarah discovered her parents had contacted Jake's family. They'd offered his mother, Linda Callahan, $50,000 to convince Jake to deny paternity and disappear from Sarah's life. Linda Callahan, a single mother working 2 jobs to support her 3 children, had thrown the check back in Richard Morrison's face and told him exactly what she thought of his blood money. But the damage was done. Jake's family had been threatened with legal action if they continued to harass the Morrison family. Jake himself had been picked up by local police on a trumped-up charge that was quickly dropped. But the message was clear: stay away from Sarah Morrison. Now, standing on the front steps of her childhood home, Sarah realized she was truly alone. Her parents had given her an ultimatum that morning: agree to the abortion and the Swiss boarding school, or leave immediately with nothing but the clothes on her back. "I'll take my trust fund," Sarah had said, grasping at straws. Victoria's laugh had been sharp as broken glass. "Your trust fund was established with conditions, Sarah. One of those conditions was maintaining the family's moral standards. You've voided that agreement." Sarah pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders and started walking down the long driveway. The December wind cut through her clothes like knives, and she could feel the first snowflakes beginning to fall. She had $47 in her wallet, no winter coat, and nowhere to go. The walk to downtown Greenwich took nearly an hour. By the time Sarah reached the town center, her feet were numb in her canvas sneakers, and snow was accumulating on her hair. She found shelter in the public library, the same place where she'd first met Jake 6 months earlier. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly librarian, looked concerned when she saw Sarah's obvious distress. "Are you all right, dear? You look frozen." Sarah managed a weak smile. "I'm fine, just waiting for my ride." But as the hours passed and the library prepared to close, Sarah's situation became desperate. She used the library's computer to search for homeless shelters, but most required parental consent for minors. The few that didn't were located in Bridgeport or New Haven, too far to reach with her limited resources. As closing time approached, Mrs. Patterson approached Sarah again. "Dear, I hate to ask, but do you have somewhere to go tonight? The weather report is calling for a significant snowstorm." Sarah's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. Tears she'd been holding back for weeks spilled down her cheeks. As she shook her head, Mrs. Patterson's face filled with concern and something else: recognition. "You're one of the Morrison children, aren't you, Sarah?" Unable to speak, Sarah nodded. Mrs. Patterson glanced around the empty library, then made a decision that would change everything. "I have a cousin," she said quietly. "Lives up in the mountains, about 2 hours north of here. He's a bit of a hermit, but he's a good man. Lost his own family years ago. If you're really in trouble and really have nowhere to go, I could call him." Sarah looked up through her tears. "Why would you help me?" The older woman's eyes were kind but sad. "Because sometimes the people who need help the most are the ones too proud to ask for it. And because I can see you're not the kind of trouble your parents probably think you are." Mrs. Patterson made the phone call from her office while Sarah waited in the main reading room. Through the glass door, Sarah could see her speaking in low, urgent tones, occasionally glancing back toward the reading room. After what felt like an eternity, she returned. "His name is Daniel Mitchell," Mrs. Patterson said. "Danny to his friends. He's agreed to come get you, but the drive will take a while in this weather. Are you sure about this, dear?" Once you make this choice, there might not be any going back. Sarah thought about her parents' cold ultimatum, about the empty mansion where she'd never really belonged, about the baby growing inside her who deserved better than the Morrison family's toxic legacy. "I'm sure," she said. They waited together. As the storm intensified outside, Mrs. Patterson made hot tea and found some crackers in the staff room, insisting Sarah eat something. As they sat in the warm library, surrounded by thousands of books, Sarah felt the first stirring of something she hadn't experienced in weeks. "Hope, what's he like?" Sarah asked. "Your cousin?" Mrs. Patterson smiled, the first genuine smile Sarah had seen all day. "Danny's had a hard life, but it made him kind, not bitter. He was married once and had a little girl. Lost them both in a car accident about 8 years ago. Been living alone up in the mountains ever since, building furniture, growing his own food. He doesn't trust easily, but when he cares about someone, he'd move heaven and earth for them." Around 9 o'clock, headlights pierced the swirling snow outside the library windows. A battered pickup truck pulled up to the curb, and Sarah watched as a tall figure in a heavy coat stepped out. Even through the storm, she could see he moved with the confident stride of someone comfortable in harsh conditions. Daniel Mitchell was not what Sarah had expected. At 35, he was younger than she'd imagined, with dark hair touched by early silver and eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was weathered by sun and wind, marked by lines that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. When Mrs. Patterson introduced them, his handshake was warm and firm, but his eyes held a wariness that Sarah recognized, the look of someone who'd been hurt deeply and wasn't eager to risk it again. "You sure about this, kid?" he asked, his voice rough but not unkind. "It's a long way up the mountain, and I don't make trips to town often. Once we go, you might be stuck for a while." Sarah looked out at the storm, then back at this stranger, who was willing to help her when her own family had cast her out. "Unsure. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." The drive up the mountain was treacherous, the truck's headlights barely penetrating the wall of snow. Daniel drove with the skill of someone who'd navigated these roads in all conditions, but even his expertise couldn't make the journey comfortable. The truck's heater worked sporadically, and Sarah found herself shivering despite the thick blanket Daniel had given her. They barely spoke during the 2-hour drive. Sarah was lost in thoughts of everything she was leaving behind, while Daniel seemed focused entirely on the road. But as they climbed higher into the mountains, Sarah began to feel something she hadn't expected, a sense of relief. Each mile that passed between her and Greenwich felt like another chain falling away. The cabin appeared suddenly in the headlights, a solid structure of logs and stone that looked like it had grown naturally from the mountainside. Smoke rose from the chimney and warm light glowed from the windows. After the cold perfection of the Morrison mansion, it looked like a real home. "It's not much," Daniel said as he helped Sarah from the truck, "but it's warm and dry." Inside, the cabin was larger than it had appeared from outside. The main room combined kitchen, dining, and living areas, with a stone fireplace crackling cheerfully at one end. Handmade furniture filled the space, chairs, tables, and shelves that spoke of careful craftsmanship and patient attention to detail. Books lined every available wall, and Sarah felt immediately at ease. "You can have the loft," Daniel said, gesturing to a ladder leading to a cozy space under the eaves. "It's not fancy, but there's a good mattress and plenty of blankets. Bathrooms through there, and the shower has hot water as long as you don't stay in too long." Sarah climbed the ladder to discover a perfect little bedroom with slanted ceilings and a window that would have a magnificent view once the storm cleared. A handmade quilt covered the bed, and someone had left a stack of clean towels on the dresser. When she came back down, Daniel was stirring something fragrant in a pot on the stove. Soup, he said without looking up. Nothing fancy, but it'll warm you up. As they ate in comfortable silence, Sarah studied her unexpected host. There was a quietness about him that reminded her of deep water, still on the surface, but with hidden currents underneath. His hands were scarred from years of woodworking, but they moved with surprising gentleness as he served the soup and sliced thick pieces of homemade bread. "Why?" Sarah finally asked. "Why did you help me?" Daniel looked up from his bowl, those storm-colored eyes meeting hers directly. "Because everyone deserves a place to be safe," he said simply. "And because my cousin Helen doesn't ask for favors unless it's important." "But you don't even know me. You don't know what I've done." "Don't matter what you've done," Daniel replied. "It matters what you do from here." As the storm raged outside and the fire crackled in the hearth, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since discovering her pregnancy: peace. For the first time in months, she wasn't being judged, threatened, or manipulated. She was simply accepted. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel nodded, then stood to clear the dishes. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." But as Sarah climbed the ladder to her new room, she had no idea that Daniel Mitchell was hiding secrets of his own, secrets that would soon turn her world upside down once again. All she knew was that for tonight, she was safe, warm, and no longer alone. The baby growing inside her seemed to sense the change too, settling peacefully as Sarah drifted off to sleep in the mountain cabin that had become her sanctuary. Sarah woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, sunlight streaming through the small window above her bed. For a moment, she forgot where she was, expecting to see her bedroom's silk wallpaper and crystal chandelier. Instead, she found herself surrounded by warm wood and the cozy comfort of Daniel's loft. The mountain view through her window took her breath away. Snow-covered peaks stretched endlessly into a brilliant blue sky, and pine trees heavy with fresh powder dotted the landscape like a Christmas card. It was beautiful in a way that made her chest tight with unexpected emotion. Downstairs, Daniel was already dressed and moving efficiently around the kitchen. He looked up when she appeared, offering a slight nod that somehow felt warmer than her parents' elaborate breakfast performances ever had. "Sleep okay?" he asked, flipping bacon in a cast-iron skillet. "Better than I have in weeks," Sarah admitted. Settling into one of the handmade chairs at his kitchen table, Daniel served breakfast without ceremony: scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, and toast made from bread he'd baked himself. The simplicity of it struck Sarah as profound after years of elaborate meals prepared by the Morrison family's cook and served on bone china. "Been thinking about your situation," Daniel said as they ate. "You're gonna need medical care. Baby and all." Sarah's stomach tightened. She'd been trying not to think about practical matters, savoring the temporary peace of the cabin. "I don't have insurance anymore. My parents cut me off from everything. Doc Martinez in Millbrook might help. She's a good person and doesn't ask too many questions about payment plans." Millbrook? Town about 40 minutes down the mountain. Bigger than Hawks Ridge, but still small enough that folks mind their own business. Daniel paused, studying her face. "That is, if you're planning to stay." The question hung in the air between them. Sarah realized she hadn't thought beyond surviving one day at a time. "I don't have anywhere else to go." "That's not what I asked." Sarah met his eyes, seeing something there she couldn't quite interpret. "Do you want me to stay?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the snow-covered pines. "Been alone up here for 8 years. Got used to the quiet, the routine. Having someone around. He shrugged. "It takes some adjusting, but my daughter would have been about your age now." The words came out rough, like they'd been scraped from somewhere deep. Maybe she would have needed help too someday. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. She'd heard the story from Mrs. Patterson, but hadn't expected Daniel to mention his lost family so directly. "I'm sorry about your wife and daughter." Daniel's jaw tightened slightly, then relaxed. Emma would have been 14 this spring, same as you. He stood abruptly, carrying his empty plate to the sink. The point is, you can stay as long as you need, but if you do, there'll be rules. What kind of rules? You pull your weight. Help with cooking, cleaning, and garden come spring. You keep up with your education. I've got books, and Mrs. Patterson can probably help with getting your coursework sent up. And you take care of yourself and that baby. Sarah nodded eagerly. I can do all that. I want to help. Good. Daniel grabbed the heavy coat from a peg by the door. Come on then. Time you saw where you're living. The tour of Daniel's property revealed a surprisingly sophisticated operation. Behind the main cabin stood a workshop where he crafted furniture, the air fragrant with sawdust and wood stain. Shelves displayed beautifully finished pieces, rocking chairs, dining tables, intricate jewelry boxes with dovetail joints that spoke of master craftsmanship. This is incredible, Sarah breathed, running her fingers along the smooth surface of a mahogany desk. You made all this? Keeps me busy. Daniel's tone was modest, but Sarah caught a flash of pride in his eyes. Sell pieces to galleries in Burlington, some shops down in Connecticut. Makes enough to keep the lights on. They visited the generator shed, the root cellar stocked with canned goods and preserved vegetables, and a greenhouse where herbs and winter vegetables grew under clouded plastic. Everything was efficient, well-maintained, and completely self-sufficient. You really don't need anyone, Sarah observed. Daniel shot her a look she couldn't read. Didn't say I needed anyone. Said you could stay. That afternoon, while Daniel worked in his shop, Sarah explored the cabin's extensive library. The collection was eclectic, classics mixed with modern fiction, technical manuals alongside poetry, medical texts next to philosophy. She pulled down a copy of Jane Eyre and settled by the fire, losing herself in the familiar story of an orphaned girl finding her way in a hostile world. She was deep in chapter 3 when a knock at the door made her jump. Daniel emerged from his workshop, wiping sawdust from his hands, his expression wary. Expecting someone? Sarah asked. No. Daniel moved to the window, peering through the curtains. His entire body went rigid. Son of a bitch, what is it? Company, the word came out like a curse. Stay here. Don't say anything unless I tell you to. Daniel opened the door to reveal a man in an expensive wool coat, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the mountain wind. Even from across the room, Sarah could see the air of authority and wealth that clung to him like cologne. Daniel Mitchell? The man's voice was smooth, cultured, with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Depends who's asking. Robert Morrison, I believe you have something that belongs to me. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Her father had found her. Don't know what you're talking about, Daniel replied. But Sarah caught the slight shift in his posture, the way his hands moved closer to his sides. My daughter, Sarah, I have reason to believe she's here. Like I said, don't know what you're talking about. Robert Morrison stepped forward, his gaze sweeping the cabin's interior. When his eyes found Sarah cowering by the fireplace, his expression shifted from polite inquiry to cold triumph. Sarah, you've caused your mother and me considerable worry. Sarah found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. How did you find me? Did you really think we wouldn't investigate every connection? Mrs. Patterson was very cooperative. Once we explained the legal implications of harboring a runaway minor. Robert's tone was conversational, but Sarah caught the underlying threat. Now gather your things. We're going home. No. Sarah stood on shaking legs. I'm not going back. You're 14 years old and 7 months pregnant. You're hardly in a position to make demands. Robert's attention shifted to Daniel. And you, Mr. Mitchell, are harboring a minor without parental consent. That's kidnapping in the state of Connecticut. She came here voluntarily, Daniel said, his voice dangerously quiet. "She's a child. Children can't give legal consent." Robert pulled out his phone. "I have the sheriff's department on speed dial. One call, and you'll be in handcuffs within the hour." Sarah watched this exchange with growing horror. After just one day of peace, her father's toxic influence was poisoning everything again. But something in Daniel's stance gave her courage. "What do you want?" she asked. Robert's smile was sharp as a blade. "It's simple. You come home. We'll arrange for private medical care during your remaining months. And after the birth, we'll handle the adoption quietly. No legal complications for anyone. And if I refuse? Then Mr. Mitchell faces charges, Mrs. Patterson loses her job and pension, and you end up in state custody anyway. The baby will be taken at birth regardless." Robert checked his expensive watch. "Your choice, Sarah, but I don't have all day." The cabin fell silent, except for the crackling of the fire. Sarah felt the weight of everyone's eyes on her, the terrible responsibility of a decision that would affect not just her life, but the lives of people who'd shown her kindness. "There's another option," Daniel said suddenly. "Both Sarah and her." Father turned toward him. "I legally adopt Sarah," Daniel continued, his voice steady. "Emancipated minor, guardians consent for medical decisions, and she stays here until the baby's born." Robert laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You? Mountain hermit with no family, no references? What court would approve that arrangement?" "One that looks at what's best for the child," Daniel replied. "Clean living environment, stable income, educational opportunities. Seems better than a family that throws pregnant children out in the snow." Sarah stared at Daniel in shock. He was offering to legally become her guardian, to tie himself permanently to her problems and complications. The sacrifice was enormous, and they barely knew each other. "That's ridiculous," Robert snapped. "Sarah is coming home, now." "Actually," a new voice said from the doorway, "that's not your decision to make anymore." Everyone turned to see a woman in a sheriff's uniform standing in the open door. She was tall and athletic, with graying blonde hair and the kind of confident presence that came from years of dealing with difficult situations. "Sheriff Amanda Hayes," she introduced herself. "Got a call about a domestic disturbance." Robert's face flushed red. "There's no disturbance here, Sheriff. I'm simply collecting my daughter." "The daughter you kicked out 3 days ago for being pregnant?" Sheriff Hayes stepped into the cabin, her hand resting casually on her radio. "The one who had to walk 5 miles in a snowstorm to find shelter." "How do you? Small towns, Mr. Morrison. Word travels." Sheriff Hayes looked at Sarah with kind but serious eyes. "Miss, are you here of your own free will?" Sarah glanced between her father's furious face and Daniel's encouraging nod. "Yes, ma'am." "And do you feel safe here?" "Safer than I've felt in months." Sheriff Hayes nodded. "Mr. Morrison, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You have no legal right to remove your daughter from this property without her consent or a court order. She's 14, old enough to petition for emancipation in Vermont, especially given the circumstances." Sheriff Hayes's tone remained professionally polite. "If you'd like to pursue legal action, I suggest you contact an attorney. But now you need to go." Robert Morrison's composure finally cracked. "This is insane. She's throwing her life away for some mountain vagrant. Sarah, think about your future, your education, your opportunities." "I am thinking about my future," Sarah said, her voice stronger than she felt. "And it doesn't include you." Robert stared at her for a long moment, his face cycling through anger, disappointment, and something that might have been genuine hurt. Finally, he pulled out a business card and placed it on Daniel's kitchen table. "When you realize what a mistake you're making," he said to Sarah, "call me. But don't wait too long. Some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt." After Robert left, the cabin felt strangely empty. Sheriff Hayes stayed for another hour, explaining the legal process for emancipation and guardian arrangement. She seemed genuinely concerned for Sarah's welfare and impressed by Daniel's character references from longtime Millbrook residents. "It'll take a few weeks to process," she explained before leaving. "But given the circumstances, I don't see any major obstacles. Mr. Mitchell has a clean record and steady income. You'll need regular check-ins with social services, but that's standard." After the sheriff departed, Sarah and Daniel sat in silence by the fire. The weight of what had just happened settled over them like a heavy blanket. "You didn't have to do that," Sarah finally said, "offering to adopt me. You barely know me." Daniel stared into the flames, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe, but Emma would have wanted me to help someone who needed it. And you remind me of her, stubborn, brave, too smart for your own good. What if my father causes trouble? What if this affects your business? Let me worry about that." Daniel turned to look at her directly. "The question is, are you sure? This is what you want? It's not going to be easy living up here. Winters are long, summers are short, and the nearest neighbor is 10 miles away." Sarah thought about her father's offer: private medical care, a comfortable home, all her material needs met. Then she thought about the coldness in her parents' eyes, the conditions and ultimatums, the way they'd tried to erase both her and her baby from existence. "I'm sure," she said. "This feels more like home than anywhere I've ever lived." Daniel nodded slowly. "Then we'll make it work." As night fell over the mountain, Sarah helped Daniel prepare dinner, chopping vegetables while he seasoned a pot roast. The domestic routine felt natural, comfortable in a way that surprised her. For the first time since discovering her pregnancy, she felt like she might actually have a future worth fighting for. But neither she nor Daniel suspected that Robert Morrison was already making phone calls from his hotel room in Millbrook, setting in motion a plan that would test their newfound alliance in ways they couldn't imagine. The battle for Sarah's future was just beginning. 3 weeks had passed since Robert Morrison's visit, and Sarah had begun to believe she might actually be safe. The emancipation paperwork was progressing smoothly. Daniel had proven to be a patient and understanding guardian, and even Dr. Martinez in Millbrook had agreed to provide prenatal care on a payment plan. Life on the mountain had settled into a comfortable rhythm of shared meals, quiet evenings by the fire, and long conversations about books, philosophy, and dreams for the future. Then Victoria Morrison arrived. Unlike her husband's dramatic confrontation, Victoria's approach was subtle, calculated, and infinitely more dangerous. She appeared on a crisp February morning when Daniel had gone to Millbrook for supplies, driving a rented SUV up the treacherous mountain road with the determination of a woman on a mission. Sarah was in the workshop, sanding a jewelry box Daniel had been teaching her to make, when she heard the vehicle approach. Assuming Daniel had returned early, she stepped outside to help carry groceries. Instead, she found herself face to face with her mother for the first time since that terrible night in December. Victoria Morrison looked exactly as Sarah remembered: perfectly styled auburn hair, immaculate makeup, and a charcoal gray wool coat that probably cost more than most people made in a month. But there was something different in her eyes, a vulnerability that Sarah had never seen before. "Hello, sweetheart," Victoria said softly. "You look well." Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her belly, now noticeably rounded at 24 weeks. "What are you doing here? May I come in? It's quite cold, and we need to talk." Against her better judgment, Sarah found herself stepping aside. Victoria entered the cabin with the careful attention of someone appraising real estate, her gaze taking in every detail from the handmade furniture to the extensive book collection. "Charming," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Very rustic." "Daniel will be back soon," Sarah said, remaining standing near the door. "Actually, he won't." Victoria removed her gloves and settled into one of Daniel's chairs, as if she owned the place. "I called the hardware store in Millbrook. They told me he'd just left for Burlington to pick up some special order wood. He won't be back for hours. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. How did you know he went to the hardware store? I make it my business to know things, Sarah. Just as I know you've been seeing Dr. Martinez, that you're having a girl, and that the baby is healthy and developing normally. Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. I also know that Daniel Mitchell isn't quite the simple mountain man he pretends to be. What do you mean? Victoria opened her expensive handbag and withdrew a manila folder. Sit down, sweetheart. There are some things about your guardian that you need to know. Despite every instinct screaming at her to run, Sarah found herself moving to the couch. Victoria opened the folder and spread several documents across the coffee table. Newspaper clippings, police reports, and what looked like medical records. Daniel Mitchell, Victoria began, her voice taking on the cadence of a courtroom presentation, was indeed married to a woman named Catherine, and they had a daughter named Emma. What you probably don't know is how they died. Sarah's stomach clenched. It was a car accident. Yes, but not the kind you're imagining. Victoria pointed to a police report dated 8 years earlier. Daniel was driving. He'd been drinking at a work party, celebrating the completion of a major construction project. His blood alcohol was 0.12, well over the legal limit. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. That's not true. It's all right here in black and white. He lost control on a mountain road, not unlike the one you drive every day. The car rolled 3 times before hitting a tree. Catherine died instantly. Emma lived for 2 days in the hospital before the injuries took her. Sarah stared at the documents, her vision blurring with tears. The police report was official, stamped and signed. The newspaper headline read, "Local contractor charged in fatal DUI crash." He never told you, did he? Victoria's voice had softened, taking on a tone of maternal concern. About the drinking, the guilt, the reason he really lives alone up here. He doesn't drink, Sarah whispered. I've never seen him touch alcohol. Not anymore, perhaps. But that doesn't change what happened, or what he's capable of when he's under stress. Victoria leaned forward, her eyes intense. Sarah, this man killed his own family through reckless behavior. Do you really think your baby is safe with him? Sarah's world felt like it was tilting sideways. Everything she thought she knew about Daniel was crumbling. The gentleman who taught her woodworking, who made her breakfast every morning, who read to her in the evenings, was he really a killer? Why are you showing me this? Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. Because I love you. Victoria's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in Sarah's memory, her mother's emotion seemed genuine. I know I handled things badly before. Your father and I, we were so focused on protecting our reputation that we forgot to protect you. But I've had months to think, to realize what really matters. Victoria reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. Her touch was warm, familiar, and Sarah found herself leaning into the comfort despite everything. I want you to come home, Victoria continued. Not to hide you away or force you into decisions you don't want to make. I want to help you raise your daughter. I want to be a grandmother. You said the baby would ruin the family name. That was fear talking. Fear and pride and stupidity. Victoria's tears were flowing freely now. I've watched Madison struggle through law school, seen Trevor turn into a cold little stranger who cares more about status than people. But you, Sarah, you have something your siblings lost. You have heart, and I want your daughter to have that too. Sarah felt her own tears starting. This was the mother she'd always wanted, warm, loving, accepting. But doubt gnawed at her. What about Dad? He made it clear what he thinks of me. Your father is a proud man, but he's not heartless. When I told him about my plans to come here, he didn't try to stop me. He just said to bring you home safely. Victoria squeezed Sarah's hand. He's already started converting the east wing into a nursery suite. Private entrance, full kitchen, everything you'd need to live independently while still having family support. The offer was tempting, more tempting than Sarah wanted to admit. She thought about the long, isolated winter months ahead, about giving birth with only Daniel and a country doctor for support. She thought about raising a child in a cabin with no other children for miles, no playmates, no opportunities for the normal childhood experiences she'd taken for granted. "I don't know," Sarah said. "Daniel has been good to me. He's going through the legal process to become my guardian." "A legal process that can be stopped with one phone call," Victoria said gently. "Sarah, I have influence, resources, connections. I can make this adoption disappear and ensure you have the best possible care for the rest of your pregnancy. Private doctors, nutritionists, birth coaches, everything money can buy. And in return, no strings attached. You come home, you have your baby, and we support you in whatever decisions you make about your future. College, career, marriage, all your choice. I just want the chance to be part of my granddaughter's life." Victoria pulled out another folder, this one filled with glossy brochures and photographs. "I've been researching the best private schools, nanny services, and pediatricians. Look at these nursery designs. We could have any of them installed before you're due." Sarah flipped through the materials, dazzled by the luxury and attention to detail. Imported furniture, designer clothes in tiny sizes, promises of the best education money could buy. It was everything she'd grown up with, everything she'd thought she'd lost forever. "There's something else," Victoria said quietly. "I found Jake." Sarah's head snapped up. "What?" "He's been trying to contact you for months. Your father's legal threats scared his family, but Jake never stopped looking for ways to reach you. He's working full-time now, saving money for college. When I told him about the baby, he cried." Victoria pulled out a letter, Sarah's name written across the front in Jake's familiar handwriting. "He wants to be part of his daughter's life, Sarah. He wants to marry you if you'll have him. He's even willing to move to Greenwich, to be close to you and the baby." Sarah took the letter with trembling hands. Jake's words, written weeks ago, poured out in a flood of love, regret, and desperate hope. He wrote about dreams of their future together, about wanting to be a good father, about how much he missed her. The letter was tear-stained and worn, as if he'd read it many times before sending it. "Where is he now?" Sarah asked. "Working at his uncle's garage, but he could be here in hours if you wanted to see him. Or better yet, you could come home and surprise him." Victoria's voice was warm with possibility. "Imagine his face when he sees you, sees how beautiful you look carrying his child." Sarah clutched the letter to her chest, overwhelmed by emotion. For months, she'd convinced herself that Jake had moved on, that her parents' threats had driven him away permanently. To know that he'd never stopped fighting for her, never stopped loving her, it changed everything. "I need time to think," Sarah said, "of course." Victoria stood and moved toward the door. "But don't take too long, sweetheart. Every day you stay here is another day you're putting yourself and your baby at risk. And every day that passes is another day Jake spends wondering if you still love him." After Victoria left, Sarah sat alone in the cabin, surrounded by the evidence of Daniel's past and the promises of her mother's future. The police reports seemed to mock her from the coffee table, while Jake's letter burned in her hands like a brand. When Daniel returned that evening, his arms full of groceries and his face bright with plans for a new rocking chair design, Sarah felt like she was seeing a stranger. Was this gentle man really capable of the violence described in those reports? Had his kindness been nothing more than guilt-driven penance? "You're quiet tonight," Daniel observed as they prepared dinner together. "Everything okay?" Sarah watched his hands as he chopped vegetables, steady, careful, precise. Were these the same hands that had gripped a steering wheel while drunk, causing the crash that killed his family? "Daniel," she said quietly, Tell me about Catherine. And Emma, his knife stilled on the cutting board. When he looked up, his eyes held a pain so deep it seemed bottomless. What brought that up? I realize I don't know much about them, about what happened. Daniel set down the knife and moved to the window, staring out at the snow-covered pines. For a long moment, Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. Catherine was a teacher, he said finally. 3rd grade. She had this laugh that could light up a room, and she never met a stray animal she wouldn't try to help. His voice was rough with memory. Emma was 7. Curious about everything, always asking questions, always building something with blocks. Or sticks or whatever she could find. How did they die? Daniel's shoulders tensed. Car accident. Mountain road, winter conditions. I was driving. Were you drinking? The question hung in the air like a blade. Daniel turned to face her, and Sarah saw something die in his eyes. Who told you? He asked quietly. Does it matter? It does to me. Sarah felt tears starting again. My mother came by today. She had police reports, newspaper articles. She said you were drunk, that you killed them. Daniel nodded slowly, as if he'd been expecting this moment for weeks. She's right. I had been drinking at a company party. Not much, I thought, just a couple beers over several hours, but it was enough. He moved to the kitchen table and sat down heavily. I've relived that night every day for 8 years. The roads were icy, I was tired, and when that deer jumped out, my reflexes were just a split second too slow. Why didn't you tell me? Because I knew what you'd think. Same thing everyone thinks. Same thing I think. Daniel's voice was hollow with self-loathing. I killed the 2 people I loved most in this world because I made a stupid, selfish decision. Sarah stared at this man who had shown her nothing but kindness, trying to reconcile his gentleness with the horror of what he'd done. Do you still drink? Haven't touched a drop since that night. Won't ever again, but the guilt is still there, every day. Sarah thought about her mother's offer, about Jake's letter, about the nursery being prepared in Greenwich. Then she looked at Daniel, broken and honest and real in a way her family had never been. I think I should go home, she said quietly. Daniel closed his eyes and nodded. Maybe you should. My mother says she can stop the adoption, that she has the resources to give me and the baby everything we need. She probably can. She found Jake. He wants to marry me, wants to be part of the baby's life. Good. That's good, Sarah. You deserve to be with someone who loves you. His acceptance hurt worse than anger would have. Sarah had expected him to fight for her, to argue that she belonged on the mountain. Instead, he was letting her go as easily as he'd taken her in. Will you drive me down tomorrow? She asked, if that's what you want. That night, Sarah lay in the loft, staring at the ceiling, Jake's letter pressed against her heart. Outside, wind howled through the pines, and she could hear Daniel moving restlessly in his room below. She thought about the life waiting for her in Greenwich, comfort, security, love, and the chance to give her daughter everything money could buy. But as dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Sarah felt something twist in her chest. This place had become home in a way the Morrison mansion never had. Daniel had become family in a way her blood relatives never had been. Still, the pull of her old life was strong. The promise of reuniting with Jake, of having her mother's support, of giving her daughter every advantage, it was everything she'd thought she wanted. She just didn't understand. Yet how much it was going to cost her. The ride down the mountain felt like a funeral procession. Daniel drove in silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, while Sarah stared out the passenger window at the landscape she was leaving behind. Every mile marker seemed to pull her further from the person she'd become, and closer to the girl she'd been. Lost, angry, and desperately trying to please people who would never truly love her. Victoria was waiting at the Millbrook town limits. In a black Mercedes sedan, her smile bright as freshly polished silver. She embraced Sarah with theatrical warmth, making a show of concern over her daughter's ordeal while completely ignoring Daniel's presence. "Oh, sweetheart, you look so tired," Victoria cooed, running her hands over Sarah's rounded belly. "Don't worry, we'll have you back to perfect health in no time." Sarah glanced back at Daniel, who stood beside his truck like a man watching his house burn down. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything." Daniel nodded once, his storm-colored eyes unreadable. "Take care of yourself, kid. And the baby." Those were the last words he spoke to her. The drive to Greenwich passed in a blur of Victoria's chatter about nursery preparations, prenatal vitamins, and appointment schedules. Sarah barely listened, her mind still back on the mountain with a man whose greatest sin had been trusting her with his deepest shame. The Morrison mansion looked exactly as Sarah remembered, imposing, perfect, and cold as a mausoleum. But Victoria led her to the East Wing, where Sarah discovered her mother hadn't been lying about the renovations. The space had been transformed into a luxurious apartment with hardwood floors, expensive furniture, and windows that flooded the rooms with natural light. "Your father insisted on the private entrance," Victoria explained, opening French doors that led to a covered porch. "He wanted you to feel independent while still being close to family." The nursery took Sarah's breath away. Soft yellow walls were adorned with hand-painted murals of fairy tale scenes, while white furniture that probably cost more than most cars filled the space. A rocking chair sat in the corner, not handmade like Daniel's pieces, but factory perfect and upholstered in silk. "Do you love it?" Victoria asked, her eyes bright with expectation. "It's beautiful," Sarah said, and meant it. But something felt wrong, like a song played in the wrong key. "Wait until you see what else I have planned." Victoria pulled out her phone and scrolled through a list that seemed to go on forever. "Tomorrow you have an appointment with Dr. Franklin. He's the best obstetrician in Connecticut. Thursday is a consultation with a nutritionist, and Friday we're meeting with Catherine Whitmore." "Who's Catherine Whitmore?" "The finest newborn photographer in New England. We want to capture every precious moment when your daughter arrives." Victoria's smile was dazzling. "I've also arranged for interviews with 3 different nanny services. Only the best agencies, of course." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the schedule, by the assumption that every decision about her life and her baby had already been made. "What about Jake?" "You said he wanted to see me." "All in good time, darling. First we need to get you properly settled and healthy. The boy can wait a few more days." That evening, Sarah dined with her family in the formal dining room for the first time since her expulsion. The table could seat 12, but the 4 of them, Sarah, Victoria, Richard, and Trevor, felt lost in the cavernous space. Madison was still at Yale, and Sarah wondered if her sister even knew she was back. Richard Morrison looked older than Sarah remembered, with new lines around his eyes and gray threading through his dark hair. He spoke to her politely but distantly, asking about her health and the baby's development in the tone he might use with a client. "We'll need to discuss the birth certificate," he said over the soup course. "Given your age and unmarried status, there are certain legal considerations." "What kind of considerations?" Sarah asked. "Paternity claims, custody arrangements, financial responsibilities. Young Mr. Callahan's family has limited resources. If he proves troublesome regarding support obligations, we may need to take protective measures." Sarah's spoon clattered against her bowl. "Protective measures?" "Nothing dramatic," Victoria interjected quickly. "Just ensure your rights and the baby's rights are properly protected." But Sarah caught the look that passed between her parents. A wordless communication that spoke of plans she wasn't privy to. The old familiar dread began growing in her stomach. The next few days blurred together in a parade of appointments, consultations, and preparation sessions. Dr. Franklin was indeed an excellent physician, but he spoke to Victoria more than Sarah, discussing the patient as if she weren't in the room. The nutritionist presented a meal plan that eliminated every food Sarah had learned to love during her time on the mountain. The baby photographer showed portfolio images of impossibly perfect newborns posed like tiny dolls. Through it all, Sarah asked repeatedly about Jake, only to be told he was arranging his schedule or preparing for the reunion. Her mother's answers grew more vague each day, and Sarah's sense of unease deepened. The truth came out by accident. Sarah had been living in the mansion for a week when she decided to call Mrs. Patterson to thank her for the kindness that had led her to Daniel. The library's number was still programmed in her old cell phone, which Victoria had returned along with her other personal effects. "Sarah, dear." Mrs. Patterson's voice was warm with genuine pleasure. "How wonderful to hear from you. How are you settling back home?" "Fine," Sarah said, though the word felt like a lie. "I wanted to thank you for everything you did for me." "Oh, sweetheart, you don't need to thank me. I just hope everything worked out for the best." There was a pause. "Though I have to say, poor Daniel has been beside himself since you left." Sarah's heart clenched. "Has he said anything?" "Not much. You know how he is with words. But he came by the library yesterday looking for books on child development and single parenting. When I asked why, he just said he wanted to understand what you were going through." Tears stung Sarah's eyes. Even after her betrayal, Daniel was trying to support her from a distance. "Mrs. Patterson," Sarah said carefully, "have you seen Jake Callahan recently?" "Jake? Oh, honey, didn't your mother tell you?" "The Callahan family moved to Oregon 3 weeks ago. Linda got a job offer with a manufacturing company out there. Much better pay and benefits than anything available here. They left right after your mother spoke with them." The phone slipped from Sarah's numb fingers, clattering on the hardwood floor. Jake was gone. Had been gone for weeks, despite her mother's promises and carefully crafted letters. Sarah found Victoria in the conservatory, arranging flowers with the focused attention of a woman avoiding difficult conversations. "You lied to me," Sarah said. Without preamble, Victoria's hands stilled on the roses. "About what, darling?" "Jake. His family moved to Oregon weeks ago. There was no letter, no plan for him to come here, no talk of marriage." Victoria sighed and set down her pruning shears. "Sarah, please sit. Let me explain." "Explain how you forged a letter? How do you make up an entire fantasy to get me away from Daniel?" "I didn't forget anything." Victoria's voice was calm, reasonable. "Jake did write that letter. Last month, before his family decided to move. His mother brought it to me when I made my offer." "What offer?" $50,000 for them to relocate and sever all contact with you." Victoria spoke as if discussing the weather. "It was a generous amount, enough for Linda to start over somewhere else with better opportunities." Sarah felt the room spinning around her. "You bought him off." "I bought his family a new life. Jake is 17 years old with no education beyond high school and no prospects. What kind of future could he offer you? What kind of father would he be to your daughter? That wasn't your decision to make. It was the practical decision. The right decision." Victoria's composure was cracking, revealing the steel underneath. "Sarah, you're 15 years old and about to become a mother. Romance is a luxury you can't afford. So you manipulated me into leaving the one person who actually cared about me. I brought you home to people who love you. People who love. Controlling me." Sarah's voice was rising, months of suppressed anger finally finding release. "Daniel never lied to me. Even when the truth made him look terrible, he told me everything. But you built an entire fantasy just to get what you wanted." Victoria's face hardened. "Daniel Mitchell is a drunk who killed his own family. If you think that's preferable to people who want to give you and your baby the best possible life, then you're more foolish than I thought. At least he was honest about his mistakes." "Honest?" Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Sarah, There are things about your precious Daniel that you don't know. Things I chose not to tell you because I thought the truth about his drinking was enough. What are you talking about? Victoria moved to an antique writing desk and withdrew another folder, thicker this time, filled with documents that looked official and damning. Daniel Mitchell wasn't just any contractor 8 years ago, Victoria said, spreading papers across the coffee table. He was the head of Mitchell Construction, a company with over 200 employees and contracts worth millions of dollars. The night he killed his family, he was celebrating the completion of the Riverside Shopping Complex, a project that was finished 6 months behind schedule and $3 million over budget. Sarah stared at the construction documents, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The delays weren't due to weather or permit issues, Victoria continued. They were caused by Daniel's drinking problem, which had been getting worse for years. He was missing meetings, making poor decisions, losing key employees. The company was hemorrhaging money. That doesn't mean 3 families lost their homes because Daniel's company defaulted on their contracts. 24 workers were laid off right before Christmas. And the shopping complex itself? Victoria pointed to an engineering report stamped with red warnings. The foundation work was so shoddy that the entire structure had to be torn down 18 months later. Sarah felt sick. How do you know all this? Because Morrison and Associates represented 5 of the families who sued Mitchell Construction. I've had these files for years, but I never thought I'd need them. Victoria's voice softened with what seemed like genuine concern. Sarah, this man's negligence destroyed dozens of lives long before he got behind the wheel that night. The drunk driving was just the final tragedy in a long pattern of irresponsible behavior. The papers seemed to mock Sarah from the table: lawsuits, bankruptcy filings, engineering reports that painted Daniel as a careless man whose selfishness had caused widespread harm. How could the gentle woodworker who taught her to sand with the grain be the same person who had ruined so many families? Why didn't you tell me this before? Sarah asked. Because I hoped the truth about the accident would be enough. I didn't want to completely destroy your image of him unless I had to. Victoria knelt beside Sarah's chair, her expression maternal and concerned. Sweetheart, I know this is hard to hear, but this is who Daniel Mitchell really is. A man who takes what he wants without considering the consequences to others. That's not true. He saved me when I had nowhere to go. Did he? Or did he see a vulnerable pregnant girl and decide she could fill the hole left by his dead daughter? Victoria's words were gentle but poisonous. Think about it, Sarah. What man takes in a 14-year-old stranger without questions? What kind of man isolates her on a mountain where she has no contact with the outside world? The questions hit Sarah like physical blows. Doubts she'd pushed away during her time in the cabin came rushing back. Had Daniel's kindness been genuine? Or had she been nothing more than a replacement for the family he'd destroyed? I want to call him, Sarah said suddenly. I want to hear his side of this. Victoria's face went carefully blank. Of course, darling. Though I should mention that he's been having some difficulties lately. What kind of difficulties? Sheriff Hayes called this morning. Apparently, someone reported Daniel for child endangerment. Taking in a pregnant minor without proper background checks or social service supervision. The state is investigating. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Who reported him? Anonymous tip. Could have been anyone who disapproved of the situation. Victoria's tone was innocent, but her eyes held a satisfaction that made Sarah's stomach turn. You did this. I protected my daughter from a dangerous situation. You destroyed the only person who ever helped me. I brought you home where you belong. Victoria's composure finally snapped completely. Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed? For you? The political connections your father has lost because of this scandal? The social standing we've given up? And for what? So you can pine for a drunk who killed his own child. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Sarah stared at her mother, really looked at her. and saw not love but possession, not concern but control. Everything Victoria had done, every manipulation and lie, had been designed to bring Sarah back under the family's influence. "You never cared about me," Sarah said quietly. "You just couldn't stand losing control." "That's not true." "It is true. You couldn't bear that I'd found something real with someone who actually accepted me as I am. So you destroyed it." Sarah stood awkwardly, her pregnant belly making the movement clumsy. "I'm leaving." "You're not going anywhere. You're a minor, you're pregnant, and you have nowhere to go. Daniel Mitchell is under investigation and couldn't take you back even. If he wanted to, then I'll find somewhere else." Victoria's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "Where? You have no money, no resources, no friends. Your precious Jake is gone. Your mountain hermit is facing criminal charges. Face it, Sarah. You need us whether you want to admit it or not." Sarah looked around the beautiful apartment that felt like a prison, at the nursery that would house a baby whose life had already been planned by people who saw her as a possession rather than a person. Her mother was right about one thing: she had nowhere to go. But staying here would mean watching her daughter grow up in the same toxic environment that had nearly destroyed her. "Maybe I do need you," Sarah said, "but my daughter won't." Victoria's face went pale. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'd rather give her up for adoption than let her become another Morrison trophy." The threat hit its mark. Victoria actually stumbled backward, her hand pressed to her chest as if Sarah had struck her. "You wouldn't dare. She's our grandchild. Our blood. She's my daughter. And I'll do whatever it takes to protect her from becoming what you tried to make me." That night, alone in her beautiful prison, Sarah called the one person she could think of who might help her. Sheriff Hayes answered on the second ring, her voice professional but warm. "Sarah? Is everything all right?" "Sheriff Hayes, I need to know the truth about Daniel's investigation." There was a pause. "What investigation?" "My mother said someone reported him for child endangerment. That the state was investigating." "Sarah, I haven't received any such report. And as far as I know, Daniel Mitchell isn't under investigation by anyone." The relief was so overwhelming that Sarah nearly collapsed. "So he's okay?" "As far as I know. Though I haven't seen him in town lately. He's been keeping to himself more than usual." After hanging up, Sarah sat in the dark nursery, surrounded by expensive things that felt as cold as winter moonlight. She thought about Daniel alone in his cabin, probably believing she'd betrayed him for money and comfort. She thought about Jake somewhere in Oregon, starting a new life with the money her parents had used to buy his silence. Most of all, she thought about the baby growing inside her, her daughter, who deserved better than the poisonous legacy of the Morrison family. For the first time since leaving the mountain, Sarah knew exactly what she had to do. Sarah's escape plan began with a lie so simple it was almost elegant. 3 days after her confrontation with Victoria, she complained of severe back pain during breakfast, clutching her lower spine with theatrical agony. "Oh, sweetheart," Victoria fretted, immediately summoning Dr. Franklin for an emergency consultation. "You must have strained something. Perhaps the nursery furniture arrangement yesterday was too much activity." Dr. Franklin prescribed bed rest and gentle walks, suggesting that swimming might help with the discomfort. Victoria, seized by maternal guilt over the furniture incident, immediately enrolled Sarah in prenatal water aerobics at an exclusive club in Stamford. "The instructor, Mrs. Chun, is highly recommended," Victoria explained, organizing Sarah's schedule with military precision. 3 sessions per week, plus access to the therapeutic pool for independent swimming. "The driver will take you there and back." Sarah nodded meekly, playing the role of the grateful daughter while internally celebrating. The classes would give her 3 unsupervised hours twice a week, more freedom than she'd had since returning to Greenwich. The first session was legitimate. Sarah actually did find the warm water soothing, and Mrs. Chun proved to be a kind Woman in her 50s who treated her students as individuals rather than pregnant vessels. But more importantly, the facility had something Sarah desperately needed: unrestricted internet access in their lounge area. While Victoria believed her daughter was floating peacefully in chlorinated water, Sarah was using the club's computers to research everything her mother had claimed about Daniel's past. What she found didn't contradict Victoria's accusations. The construction company had indeed failed. Lawsuits had been filed, and families had been hurt. But the full story was far more complex than her mother's selective presentation. Mitchell. Construction's troubles had begun when Daniel's business partner, Marcus Webb, embezzled nearly $2 million from company accounts to fund a gambling addiction. The delayed projects and cost overruns weren't due to Daniel's drinking. They were desperate attempts to cover the financial holes Webb had created. Daniel had mortgaged his own home, liquidated his retirement accounts, and worked 18-hour days trying to save the jobs of his employees. The drinking had started as stress relief and quickly spiraled into dependency. But the timeline was crucial. Daniel's alcohol problem developed as a response to the company's collapse, not as the cause of it. By the time he realized how bad things had gotten, Webb had disappeared with what remained of the operating funds, leaving Daniel to face the lawsuits alone. The accident had happened 3 months after Mitchell Construction filed for bankruptcy. Daniel had been trying to rebuild his life, working as a subcontractor while fighting legal battles and struggling with depression. The company party that night had been a small celebration for completing his first independent project since the bankruptcy, a modest success that felt like hope after months of devastation. Sarah found herself crying as she read the court transcripts from Daniel's sentencing hearing. His statement to the judge was heartbreaking in its simplicity. "I killed the only 2 people who mattered to me because I thought one night I could forget how much I'd failed them. There's no punishment you can give me worse than what I live with every day." But the most revealing document was a letter from Catherine Mitchell to her sister, dated just 2 weeks before the accident. Catherine had written about her concerns for Daniel's mental health, but also about her faith in his essential goodness. "He's drowning in guilt over things that weren't his fault," she'd written. "He thinks he failed everyone, but I see a man trying to rebuild himself piece by piece. He just needs time to remember who he really is." Sarah printed everything she could find, building a complete picture that was far different from her mother's carefully curated narrative. Daniel Mitchell wasn't a careless drunk who destroyed lives for profit. He was a man who'd lost everything trying to protect others, then made one terrible mistake that cost him the people he loved most. Armed with the truth, Sarah began planning her real escape. The second part of her plan required help from an unexpected source. Trevor, her 12-year-old brother, had been watching her with curious eyes since her return. Unlike Madison, who remained coldly distant, Trevor seemed genuinely interested in having a sister again, particularly one carrying the family's first grandchild. "Are you going to name her after someone in the family?" Trevor asked one evening as they sat in the conservatory. Victoria was at a charity board meeting, and Richard was working late at the firm. "I haven't decided yet," Sarah said carefully. She'd been thinking about names constantly, but had shared her preferences with no one. "What about Emma?" Trevor suggested. "It's pretty, and it means whole or universal in German." Sarah's breath caught. "Where did you hear that name?" "I've been reading about baby names online. Emma's been popular for years." Trevor paused, studying her face. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Do you know anyone named Emma?" "No, why?" Sarah made a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. "Trevor, can I trust you with a secret?" Her brother's eyes lit up with the excitement only a 12-year-old could feel at being included in adult confidences. "Absolutely. I mean, really trust you. Promise you won't tell Mom or Dad, no matter what." Trevor nodded solemnly. "Cross my heart and hope to die." Sarah told him everything, about Daniel, about the mountain, about their mother's lies and manipulations. Trevor listened with the serious attention of someone much older, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but never judging. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "So you want to go back to him?" Trevor finally asked. "I want to apologize. I want him to know I didn't betray him willingly." Sarah touched her belly, feeling the baby's restless movements. "And I want my daughter to grow up knowing what real love looks like. What do you need me to do?" The simplicity of his acceptance made Sarah's eyes fill with tears. "Help me get a message to him. I can't call from here. Mom monitors everything. But you could use your computer, maybe create an email account she doesn't know about?" Trevor nodded eagerly. "I know how to do that. What should I tell him?" "Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him I know the truth about his past, and that nothing changes how grateful I am for his kindness." Sarah hesitated, then made a decision that would change everything. "And tell him I'm coming home." "When?" "Soon, very soon." Trevor's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. "Sarah, you know Mom will come after you again, and this time she'd be even angrier." "I know, but I can't let my daughter grow up in this house, Trevor. It would destroy her the same way it destroyed all of us." Trevor was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What about me? When will you leave?" Sarah saw the fear in her brother's eyes, the same fear she'd carried for years. The fear of being alone with parents who saw children as possessions rather than people to love. "You're stronger than I was at your age," she said. "And you're smarter. When you're old enough, you'll find your own way out. Promise?" "I promise." That night, Trevor helped Sarah set up an encrypted email account, and she sent her first message to Daniel through Mrs. Patterson's library account. She didn't know if he would read it or respond, but she poured her heart into every word, explaining her mother's deceptions and her own growing understanding of who he really was. The response came 2 days later, forwarded through Mrs. Patterson, with a note that Daniel had been coming to the library daily, hoping for word from Sarah. "Kid," the email began, using his familiar nickname for her, "you don't owe me any apologies. I knew your family would find ways to get you back, and I knew they'd use my past against me. The things your mother told you about the construction company are mostly true. I did fail a lot of people, and I did develop a drinking problem trying to cope with that failure. But I want you to know something important. Every day you spent here made me remember who I used to be before the guilt took over. You reminded me that I was capable of protecting someone, of being trusted with something precious. Whatever your family has planned for you and your daughter, I hope you'll remember that you always have a place here if you need it. Take care of yourself and that baby. You're going to be an amazing mother." Danny, Sarah read the message a dozen times, memorizing every word. Daniel wasn't asking her to come back, wasn't making demands or threats like her parents did. He was simply letting her know she had choices. The third part of her plan required the most dangerous ally of all, her sister Madison. Madison Morrison was 22, brilliant, and as coldly ambitious as their parents. She was home for spring break, having just completed her second year at Yale Law School with perfect grades and a summer internship at a prestigious Boston firm. Sarah had always been slightly afraid of Madison's sharp intelligence and complete lack of sentimentality, but pregnancy had given Sarah new insights into family dynamics, and she'd begun to see Madison's coldness as a form of protection rather than cruelty. Her sister had survived their parents' toxic love by becoming exactly what they wanted, and in doing so, had probably saved herself from the kind of manipulation Sarah had endured. Sarah found Madison in the library, reading case law for her upcoming internship. They hadn't spoken privately since Sarah's return, exchanging only polite pleasantries at family meals. "I need legal advice," Sarah said without preamble. Madison looked up from her books, one perfectly sculpted eyebrow raised. "About what? Emancipation? Custody rights?" What options do I have as a pregnant minor? Planning another dramatic exit? Madison's tone was neutral, giving nothing away. Planning to protect my daughter from becoming what we became. Something shifted in Madison's expression, a crack in the perfect facade. Sit down. For the next hour, Madison explained the legal realities of Sarah's situation with the precision of a seasoned attorney. As a minor, Sarah had limited rights regarding custody and medical decisions. But Vermont's emancipation laws were more liberal than Connecticut's, and if Daniel were willing to resume his guardianship petition, there might be options. The key, Madison said, is proving that staying with our parents would be detrimental to both you and the baby. Emotional manipulation and financial coercion might qualify, but you'd need documentation. What kind of documentation? Madison pulled out her phone and showed Sarah a recording app. Conversations, admissions, evidence of the bribery involving the Callahan family. She paused, studying Sarah's face. Of course, obtaining such evidence would require someone to engage our parents in conversations designed to elicit incriminating statements. Someone like me? Someone exactly like you. Madison's smile was sharp as a blade. If you were to wear a recording device during, say, a family dinner where the subject of your future was discussed, you might capture some very interesting admissions. Sarah stared at her sister, seeing Madison clearly for the first time. Why? Are you helping me? Because I spent 4 years watching our parents destroy everything soft and real about you, and I did nothing to stop it. Madison's voice was quiet, but intense. I told myself it was better for you to learn early how the world really works. But seeing what they did to drive you away, and now what they're doing to drag you back, it's not making you stronger, Sarah. It's making you disappear. What about you, if they find out you helped me ... Madison laughed, but there was no humor in it. I stopped caring about their approval the day I realized love in this family comes with terms and conditions. I'll be fine. I'm exactly what they wanted me to become. But you still have a chance to be something better. What if I can't do it? What if I mess this up? Then you try again and again. Until you get free or you die trying. Madison's eyes were fierce with determination. But you don't give up and let them turn your daughter into another Madison Morrison. The recording equipment was surprisingly sophisticated. A small device that clipped to Sarah's bra and transmitted to Madison's laptop in the next room. They tested it during several casual conversations, adjusting settings until the audio quality was perfect. Remember, Madison. Coached, don't push too hard. Let them talk themselves into admissions. They're arrogant enough to brag about their manipulations if they think they've already won. The opportunity came sooner than expected. That evening, Richard arrived home with champagne and an announcement that made Sarah's blood run cold. I've found the perfect adoptive family for the baby, he said, popping the cork with satisfied precision. The Hendersons, old family money, impeccable reputation, desperate for a child. They're willing to pay all medical expenses and provide a substantial settlement for Sarah's future education. Victoria clapped her hands together in delight. Oh, Richard, that's wonderful. Sarah, isn't this exciting? Sarah forced herself to remain calm, feeling the recording device against her chest like a talisman. You've already arranged an adoption? Without asking me. We've arranged an opportunity, Victoria corrected. The final decision is yours, of course. But think about it rationally, sweetheart. You're 15 years old with no education, no job prospects, no husband. What kind of life could you provide for a child? The Hendersons have everything, Richard added, warming to his subject. Estate in Martha's Vineyard, apartment in Manhattan, children's trust fund already established. Your daughter would want nothing. And what about what I want? Sarah asked. Richard's expression hardened slightly. What you want is irrelevant. What matters is what's best for the child. How is separating her from her mother what's best? Because her mother is a child herself, Victoria's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. Sarah, we've given you every opportunity to make mature decisions, and you've failed spectacularly each time. Running away to live with a drunk, getting pregnant at 14, throwing tantrums when we try to help. These aren't the actions of someone capable of raising a child. I'm not giving up my baby. Richard set down his champagne glass with deliberate precision. You are if we say you are. We're your legal guardians, and we're authorized to make medical and legal decisions on your behalf. That's not true. It absolutely is true, Richard interrupted. I've already consulted with the family court. Given your age and the circumstances of the pregnancy, we can petition for temporary custody of the infant upon birth, especially if we can demonstrate that you're mentally unstable or have been influenced by unsuitable adults. Sarah felt the trap closing around her. Unsuitable adults like Daniel? Like the man who killed his own family and then used you to assuage his guilt, Victoria said with venomous certainty. Sarah, we have documented evidence of his past negligence, his drinking problem, his complete unsuitability as a guardian. For anyone, let alone a pregnant teenager. You mean the evidence you fabricated? Richard laughed, but there was no warmth in it. Fabricated? Everything we told you is a matter of public record. Court documents, bankruptcy filings, police reports, all real, all damning, but not complete, Sarah pressed. You didn't tell me about his partner embezzling money, or how he tried to save the company and his employees' jobs. Irrelevant. Details, Victoria dismissed. The results speak for themselves. The man is a failure who destroys everything he touches. Just like you destroyed Jake's family? The question hung in the air like smoke. Sarah watched her parents exchange looks, calculating how much they should admit. The Callahan situation was handled appropriately, Richard said finally. A modest financial incentive to relocate, nothing more. $50,000 will disappear forever. To never contact me again. Money they desperately needed, Victoria added. We helped them and removed a complication from your life. Everyone benefited. Everyone except me and Jake. You and Jake are children playing with adult emotions, Richard said dismissively. What you think is love is just hormones and inexperience. In 5 years, you'll thank us for preventing you from making an even bigger mistake. Sarah touched her belly, feeling her daughter's movements as if the baby could sense the tension. In the room. And if I refuse to give up my baby? If I fight the adoption? Richard's smile was sharp as the winter wind. Then we'll be forced to take more aggressive measures. Psychiatric evaluation, competency hearings, perhaps even charges against anyone who aided your previous flight from home. You'd have Daniel arrested, if necessary. Victoria's voice was matter of fact. We have documentation of his harboring. A runaway minor, providing alcohol to someone underage. He never gave me alcohol. According to his criminal history, he's an alcoholic who killed his family while intoxicated. Do you really think a jury would believe he maintained sobriety while caring for a pregnant teenager? Victoria's smile was coldly triumphant. 1 phone call from us, and Daniel Mitchell spends the next decade in prison. The threat hit Sarah like a physical blow, but it also gave her exactly what she needed. Her parents had just confessed to blackmail, conspiracy, and bribery, all recorded in crystal clear audio. I need some air, Sarah said, standing carefully. This is a lot to process. Of course, darling, Victoria cooed, her manner switching back to maternal concern. Take all the time you need. But remember, we're only trying to do what's best for everyone. Sarah nodded and left the room, walking calmly to the stairs despite the chaos in her mind. She had everything she needed to destroy her parents' legal standing. More importantly, she finally understood the full scope of their cruelty. They weren't just trying to control her life. They were willing to destroy Daniel's life to do it. The man who had shown her nothing but kindness was facing the threat of prison simply because he'd offered her sanctuary. Sarah climbed the stairs to her room, her hand resting protectively on her belly. Her daughter kicked strongly, as if sensing her mother's determination. "Don't worry, baby girl," Sarah whispered. "Mommy's going to make sure you're born free." The next phase of her plan would be the most dangerous yet. But Sarah Morrison was no longer the frightened child who'd been cast out in the snow. She was a woman fighting for her daughter's future, and she would burn her entire world down before she let her parents destroy one more innocent life. Sarah went into labor on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks earlier than expected. She woke to sharp contractions that took her breath away, her water breaking just as Victoria burst through the bedroom door in response to her cries. "The baby's coming early," Victoria announced with clinical efficiency, already dialing Dr. Franklin. "Richard, call the car service." "Sarah, don't panic. First babies often come before their due date." But as they rushed to Greenwich Hospital, Sarah felt a desperate urgency that had nothing to do with the contractions. Once her daughter was born, her parents' plan would accelerate. The Hendersons were waiting, adoption papers prepared, and Sarah would have perhaps hours to say goodbye to her child forever. "I want Daniel," Sarah gasped between contractions as they wheeled her into the maternity ward. "Don't be ridiculous," Victoria snapped. "That man has no place here. He's my legal guardian." "I have the right." "Your father and I are your guardians," Victoria interrupted. "And we'll make the decisions about who's present for our granddaughters." Birth. Sarah closed her eyes, conserving her strength for what was coming. Hidden in her hospital bag was a burner phone Trevor had smuggled to her, along with all the recordings Madison had helped her collect. Sheriff Hayes was on speed dial, waiting for Sarah's signal. Labor progressed rapidly. By noon, Sarah was fully dilated and ready to push. Dr. Franklin coached her through each contraction while Victoria held her hand, playing the role of supportive mother for the medical staff. "You're doing beautifully, sweetheart," Victoria murmured. "Just think, in a few hours, all of this will be over and you can start your real life." The words sent fresh determination through Sarah's exhausted body. She bore down with the next contraction, focused entirely on bringing her daughter safely into the world. Emma Rose Morrison, named for Daniel's lost daughter, and Sarah's grandmother, was born at 2:47 p.m., weighing 6 pounds and screaming with healthy lungs. When Dr. Franklin placed the baby on Sarah's chest, the world stopped. Nothing had ever felt as perfect as her daughter's warm weight against her skin. "She's beautiful," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She's perfect." Victoria leaned over to examine her granddaughter, her expression softening with genuine emotion for the first time in months. "She really is lovely. Look at those little fingers." For a moment, Sarah allowed herself to hope that maybe her mother's love for the baby would change everything. Maybe Victoria would remember what it felt like to hold her own children, to want nothing more than their happiness and safety. "The Hendersons will be so pleased," Victoria said softly. "They've been waiting so long for a daughter." The hope died as quickly as it had been born. "I need to call someone," Sarah said, reaching for the bedside phone. "You need to rest," Victoria replied firmly. "The social worker will be here soon to discuss the transition process." "What social worker?" "Mrs. Pemberton from the adoption agency. She'll help facilitate the handover once you've recovered from delivery." Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. "I haven't signed anything. I haven't agreed to give up my baby." "Sweetheart, we discussed this. You're 15 years old with no means of support. This is what's best for everyone." "It's what's best for you," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength. "But not for me and not for Emma." Victoria's expression hardened. "Emma? You named her without consulting us? She's my daughter. I'll name her whatever I want." "Your daughter? Sarah, you're a child yourself. This baby needs stability, education, opportunities, things you simply cannot provide." Sarah looked down at Emma, who had settled peacefully against her chest, A tiny fist curled near her mouth. The love she felt was so overwhelming, it was almost painful. She would do anything to protect this perfect little person. "I want to speak." "To Sheriff Hayes," Sarah said quietly. "What on earth for?" "Because she's my emergency contact, and I want her here when the social worker arrives." Victoria's face went pale. "Sarah, what are you planning?" Instead of answering, Sarah pressed the call button for the nurse. When a young woman in scrubs appeared, Sarah smiled as sweetly as she could manage. "Could you please call Sheriff Amanda Hayes in Millbrook, Vermont? The number is in my emergency contacts. Tell her Sarah Morrison is asking for her to come immediately." The nurse glanced at Victoria, who was making subtle negative gestures, then back at Sarah. "Of course, honey. Is this someone you'd like to present for support?" "Yes, please. It's very important." After the nurse left, Victoria moved closer to the bed, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "What game are you playing, Sarah?" "No game. Just making sure my rights are protected." "Your rights? You're a minor who can't even support herself, let alone a baby." "Actually," said a new voice from the doorway, "she has more rights than you might think." Everyone turned to see Madison entering the room, dressed in a sharp business suit and carrying a leather briefcase. She looked every inch the lawyer she was training to become. "Madison?" Victoria's voice was uncertain. "What are you doing here?" "Providing legal counsel to my sister." Madison approached the bed and smiled down at the baby. "She's gorgeous, Sarah. Congratulations." "Legal counsel?" Victoria's voice rose sharply. "Madison, you're not even licensed yet." "No, but Professor Williams from Yale Law is, and he's very interested in this case." Madison opened her briefcase and withdrew several documents, particularly the parts involving blackmail, bribery, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Victoria's face went white. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Really?" "Because I have several hours of recorded conversations that suggest otherwise." Madison pulled out a small digital recorder. "Would you like me to play them for the medical staff? I think they'd find your threats against Daniel Mitchell particularly compelling." "How dare you? How dare I do that?" "Protect my sister from parents who've spent months manipulating and threatening her." Madison's voice was ice cold. "You should be grateful I'm handling this quietly instead of going straight to the press." Richard Morrison chose that moment to arrive, carrying flowers and wearing the satisfied expression of a man who believed victory was assured. "How's our new granddaughter?" he asked cheerfully, then stopped short when he saw Madison's legal documents spread across the bedside table. "What's going on here?" "Your daughters are staging a little rebellion," Victoria said through gritted teeth. "Nothing we can't handle. Actually, Dad, you might want to sit down for this." Madison's tone was professionally pleasant. "Sarah has some very interesting recordings of conversations she's had with you and Mom over the past few weeks." Richard's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. "What recordings?" Sarah found her voice, strengthened by her sister's presence, and the warm weight of her daughter against her chest. "Recordings of you admitting to bribing the Callahan family, threatening to have Daniel arrested on false charges, planning to force me to give up my baby against my will." "Those conversations were private and illegal," Madison interrupted. "Conspiracy, extortion, bribery. Shall I continue?" "Oh, and the best part? Connecticut is a one-party consent state, which means Sarah had every right to record you without your knowledge." The hospital room fell silent, except for Emma's soft breathing. Sarah watched her parents' faces cycle through disbelief, anger, and growing fear as they realized the scope of their exposure. "What do you want?" Richard asked finally. "I want you to leave," Sarah said simply. "I want you to go home, tear up whatever adoption papers you've prepared, and never contact me or my daughter again." "And if we refuse?" Madison smiled, and there was nothing warm about it. "Then these recordings go to the Connecticut Bar Association, the FBI, and every major news outlet in the region. Prominent attorney family threatens mountain hermit. Bribes witnesses. Imagine how that headline would affect your political aspirations. Dad. You're bluffing. Try me. The standoff was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. Through the open door, Sarah could see Sheriff Hayes arguing with hospital security, her voice carrying clearly down the corridor. I don't care what the family says. I was specifically requested by the patient, and I have every right to be here. A moment later, Sheriff Hayes strode into the room, her uniform lending her an authority that immediately shifted the power dynamic. She took in the scene, Sarah holding her baby, Madison with her legal documents, and the Morrison parents looking trapped, and her expression hardened. Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, she said with professional courtesy. I understand there's been some confusion about custody arrangements. No confusion at all, Victoria said quickly. Sarah is a minor, and we're simply... Actually, there's been a significant development since we last spoke. Sheriff Hayes pulled out her own set of papers. Sarah's emancipation petition has been approved by Vermont Family Court. As of this morning, she's legally an adult with full custody rights over her child. Sarah felt her heart stop. It went through? Daniel Mitchell's character references were very compelling, as was the documentation of your parents' attempts at coercion. Sheriff Hayes smiled warmly. Congratulations, Sarah. You're officially free. The legal victory felt surreal, but Sarah's celebration was cut short by her father's voice, low and dangerous. This isn't over. You think running back to that drunk will solve your problems? You think he'll want to raise another man's child? Dad, stop, Madison warned. But Richard was beyond caution now, his careful political mask slipping to reveal the vindictive man underneath. Daniel Mitchell destroyed his own family through negligence and alcohol. What makes you think he won't destroy yours too? Because he's a better man than you'll ever be, Sarah said quietly. A better man? He's a broken-down hermit hiding from his failures. When reality hits, when you're dealing with a crying baby and no money and no future, don't come crawling back to us. We won't, said a familiar voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see Daniel Mitchell standing in the entrance to the room, looking uncomfortable in dress clothes, but carrying himself with quiet dignity. Sarah's heart leaped at the sight of him. Daniel, she breathed. He approached the bed slowly, his eyes moving between Sarah and the tiny bundle in her arms. Sheriff Hayes called me, said you might need some support. You came. Of course I came. Daniel's voice was rough with emotion. How are you feeling? Better now that you're here. Sarah adjusted the baby so Daniel could see her face. This is Emma Rose. Emma, meet the man who saved Mommy when she had nowhere to go. Daniel's eyes filled with tears as he looked down at the baby. She's beautiful, Sarah. Perfect. Just like another Emma was, Sarah said softly. Daniel met her eyes, understanding passing between them. Yeah, just like she was. The intimate moment was shattered by Victoria's sharp voice. This is ridiculous. You're all acting like this is some kind of fairy tale ending. Sarah, you're 15 years old with a baby and no resources. This man can't provide for you both. Actually, Daniel said, turning to face the Morrison parents, I can. My furniture business has been expanding. I've got contracts with 3 galleries now and a waiting list for custom pieces. I also own 200 acres of prime mountain land, free and clear. He pulled out his own set of documents, financial statements, property deeds, business contracts. I'm not rich by your standards, but I can provide a good life for Sarah and Emma. More importantly, I can provide them with love and respect, something you've proven incapable of. Richard laughed bitterly. Love and respect? From a man who killed his own family? The words hit Daniel like physical blows, but he stood his ground. You're right. I did kill my family. I made a terrible mistake that I'll regret every day for the rest of my life, but I learned from it. I got sober, I rebuilt myself, and I became someone worthy of trust again. He stepped closer to Richard, his voice quiet but intense. Can you say the same? When you look in the mirror, can you honestly say you've become someone worthy of your daughter's love? Richard had no answer. Sheriff Hayes checked her watch. I hate to interrupt, but the social worker from the adoption agency should be arriving soon. Sarah, what would you like me to tell Mrs. Pemberton? Sarah looked around the room, at her parents' defeated faces, at Madison's proud smile, at Daniel's steady presence, and finally down at Emma's sleeping features. Tell her the adoption has been canceled, Sarah said clearly. Emma Rose Mitchell is going home with her parents. Mitchell? Victoria's voice was sharp with shock. Sarah looked up at Daniel, hope and love shining in her eyes. If you'll have us. Daniel's answer was to lean down and gently kiss Sarah's forehead, then place a tender finger against Emma's tiny hand. Welcome home, ladies. As Sheriff Hayes escorted the Morrison parents from the room and Madison packed up her legal documents, Sarah felt a peace she'd never known before. She was finally free to love, free to choose, free to build the kind of family she'd always dreamed of. Emma stirred in her arms, opening dark eyes that seemed to take in the world with curious intelligence. Don't worry, baby girl, Sarah whispered. You're going to grow up knowing what real love looks like. The room erupted in chaos after Sarah's declaration. Victoria lunged toward the bed, her carefully maintained composure completely shattered. You cannot be serious. You're throwing your life away for a man who what? Sheriff Hayes stepped between Victoria and the bed, her hand resting casually on her radio. Who provided shelter to a pregnant teenager when her own family cast her out? Who went through legal channels to ensure her safety? Who's proven himself to be a responsible guardian? He's a murderer. Richard shouted, his political facade crumbling. Entirely. He killed his wife and child. He was convicted of vehicular manslaughter and served his sentence, Sheriff Hayes replied calmly. He's also been sober for 8 years, pays his taxes, has no history of violence, and has been vouched for by dozens of community members. Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady despite the emotional assault. Mr. Morrison, I understand your concerns about my past. If I were you, I'd have the same reservations. But I'm not the same man I was 8 years ago. People don't change. Victoria spat, especially not drunks. You're right about one thing, Daniel replied quietly. I am an alcoholic. That's something I'll be for the rest of my life. But I'm also a sober alcoholic who attends a meetings twice a week in Millbrook, sponsors 2 other men in recovery, and hasn't touched a drop of alcohol in 3,012 days. The precision of the number silenced the room. Sarah looked up at Daniel with new understanding. He'd been counting every single day of his sobriety, measuring his worthiness one sunset at a time. Sarah doesn't know this, Daniel continued, but I've been working with a family therapist for the past 6 months, preparing for the possibility of becoming a guardian. Dr. Rebecca Torres has been helping me understand the responsibilities and challenges of raising a child, especially one who's experienced trauma. He pulled out another document from his jacket pocket. This is her evaluation. She's recommended me for guardianship and believes I can provide a stable, loving environment for both Sarah and Emma. Madison, who had been quietly reviewing the paperwork, looked up with professional interest. Dr. Torres is highly respected in family psychology. Her recommendations carry significant weight in custody cases. This is insane, Victoria muttered, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. The legal reality was becoming clear. They had no grounds to challenge Sarah's decision. Richard tried a different approach, his tone shifting to wounded paternal concern. Sarah, think about what you're giving up. Your trust fund, your education, your place in society. Is this really worth throwing all of that away? What trust fund? Sarah asked pointedly. The one you said was voided because I violated the moral standards clause. And what education? Were you planning to send me to college after forcing me to give up my daughter? We could arrange something. More lies, Sarah cut him off. Just like you lied about Jake, lied about Daniel's investigation, lied about everything else. Emma stirred in Sarah's arms, making soft baby sounds that seemed to punctuate her mother's words. Daniel moved closer, his expression softening as he looked down at the infant. May I? He asked quietly. Sarah smiled and carefully transferred Emma to Daniel's arms. He held her with the practiced ease of someone who had once been a father, supporting her head perfectly, speaking in low, soothing tones. "Hello there, little one," he murmured. "Welcome to the world." Watching him with her daughter, Sarah felt a rightness she'd never experienced before. This was what family was supposed to look like: gentle, protective, full of genuine love rather than conditions and expectations. "You don't know what you're doing," Victoria said desperately. "Babies are hard work, Sarah. The sleepless nights, the constant demands, the financial pressure. You think love is enough, but it's not. You need resources, support systems, and proper medical care." "Funny," Madison interjected dryly. "Those same concerns didn't stop you from planning to hand Emma over to strangers. The Hendersons are hardly strangers. They're a respected family. With means. They're people who were willing to buy a baby," Sarah said flatly. "People who saw my daughter as a commodity to be purchased." A knock at the door interrupted the argument. A middle-aged woman in a conservative suit entered, carrying a briefcase and wearing the expression of someone accustomed to dealing with family crises. "Mrs. Pemberton," Victoria said with obvious relief. "Thank goodness you're here. There's been some confusion about the adoption arrangements." Mrs. Pemberton looked around the room, taking in the obvious tension, then consulted her clipboard. "I'm here to facilitate the transition of baby Morrison to the Henderson family. Where should we begin the paperwork?" "There won't be any paperwork," Sarah said clearly. "I'm not giving up my baby." Mrs. Pemberton's eyebrows rose. "I see, Mrs. Morrison, when we spoke yesterday, you assured me the birth mother was fully committed to the adoption plan." "The birth mother is 15 years old," Victoria said quickly. "She's confused and overwhelmed. The adoption is still proceeding. Actually, it's not." Sheriff Hayes stepped forward and handed Mrs. Pemberton a legal document. "Sarah Morrison has been legally emancipated as of this morning. She's considered an adult under Vermont law and has full custody rights over her child." Mrs. Pemberton studied the document carefully. "This does complicate things. If the birth mother is legally an adult and chooses to retain custody, ... She looked at Sarah directly. "Miss Morrison, do you understand the full implications of this decision? Raising a child is a tremendous responsibility." "I understand," Sarah replied firmly, "and I have support." "What kind of support?" Daniel stepped forward, still holding Emma. "I'm Daniel Mitchell, Sarah's legal guardian and fiancé. We're prepared to provide a stable home for Sarah and Emma." "Fiancé?" Victoria's voice was shrill with shock. Sarah looked up at Daniel, confusion clear in her eyes. They'd never discussed marriage, barely discussed their feelings at all. Daniel met her gaze steadily. "If you'll have me," he said quietly. "I know it's not the romantic proposal you probably dreamed of, but I love you. Sarah, I've loved you since you first fell asleep reading in my cabin. And I already love Emma because she's part of you." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. "But I'm so young and you're 35 years old and tired of being alone," Daniel finished. "I'm not asking you to decide right now. I'm just asking if you'll consider building a life together when you're ready." "This is ridiculous," Richard exploded. "She's 15. This is statutory rape. Vermont's age of consent is 16, and the relationship hasn't been consummated," Madison said calmly. "Even if it had been, there's a close-in-age exception that would apply. Legally speaking, there's no issue." Mrs. Pemberton was taking notes. furiously. "Mr. Mitchell, what are your qualifications for raising a child?" "I'm a successful business owner with a stable income and clear property title. I've completed parenting classes and psychological evaluation. Most importantly, I understand the responsibility I'm taking on." "And Miss Morrison, you're certain about this decision?" Sarah looked around the room, at her parents' furious faces, at Madison's proud expression, at Sheriff Hayes' supportive smile, and finally at Daniel holding her daughter with such tender care. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Mrs. Pemberton closed her briefcase with a decisive snap. "Then there's nothing more for me to do here, Mr. and Mrs. Morrison. I'll be in touch about canceling the Henderson arrangement." "Wait," Victoria called desperately. "The adoption fees, the medical expenses. We've already committed to significant financial obligations." "Financial obligations you took on without consulting the birth mother," Mrs. Pemberton replied coolly. "That's not my concern." After Mrs. Pemberton left, the hospital room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Richard and Victoria stood near the window, their defeat evident in every line of their bodies. 30 years, Richard said finally, his voice hollow. 30 years of building a reputation, a practice, a legacy. And you're going to destroy it all. "I'm not destroying anything," Sarah replied. "I'm just choosing not to be part of it anymore. The recordings Madison has could end my career." "Then maybe you should have thought about that before threatening innocent people and bribing families to disappear." Victoria turned from the window, her eyes red with unshed tears. "I know you think we're monsters, Sarah, but everything we did because we love you." "No," Sarah said sadly. "Everything you did because you love controlling me. There's a difference. And what happens when this mountain fantasy falls apart? When you realize what you've given up?" "Then I'll deal with it," Sarah said. Simply, like an adult, because that's what I am now. Dr. Franklin chose that moment to return, bringing with him the efficient bustle of medical routine. "How are we feeling, Sarah? Ready to discuss discharge procedures?" "More than ready," Sarah said, looking meaningfully at her parents. "Excellent. We'll want to keep you and baby overnight for observation, but if everything looks good, you can go home tomorrow morning." "Home," Sarah repeated, tasting the word. It sounded perfect. As the medical staff bustled around checking vitals and updating charts, Richard and Victoria quietly gathered their things. At the door, Victoria paused. "When you realize your mistake," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "don't expect us to fix it. You're on your own now." "I've been on my own since the night you threw me out," Sarah replied. "I'm just finally admitting it." After her parents left, the room felt lighter, as if an oppressive weight had been lifted. Madison packed up her legal documents while Sheriff Hayes completed her incident reports. "I need to head back to Millbrook," Sheriff Hayes said, "but I'll check in with you folks in a few days." "Daniel, you still planning to go through with the official adoption paperwork? If Sarah wants me to." "I do," Sarah said without hesitation. "Emma deserves to have a father who chooses her, not one who is trapped into responsibility." "Sheriff." Hayes smiled. "Then I'll expedite the paperwork. Should be finalized within the month." Madison approached the bed, her professional mask finally slipping to reveal genuine emotion. "I'm proud of you, Sarah. It took courage to stand up to them. I couldn't have done it without your help." "Yes, you could have. You're stronger than you know." Madison kissed Sarah's forehead gently. "I'll visit when I can, and if you ever need legal help, you know where to find me." "What about you? Will they make your life difficult?" Madison's smile was sharp. "Let them try. I graduate law school next year, and I already have job offers from 3 firms. Their influence can't touch me anymore." After Madison left, Sarah found herself alone with Daniel and Emma for the first time as a family. The enormity of what had just happened began to sink in. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked, settling into the chair beside her bed. I think so. It's just ... surreal. This morning I was trapped, and now ... now you're free. We're free, Sarah corrected. All three of us. Daniel looked down at Emma, who was sleeping peacefully in his arms. I meant what I said about marriage, Sarah. I'm not pressuring you, but I want you to know my feelings are real. I know they are. Mine are too. Sarah reached out to touch his hand, but maybe we should take things slow. I'm still figuring out who I am without my parents' expectations. As slow as you need, Daniel agreed. We have all the time in the world. Outside the hospital window, snow was beginning to fall, but Sarah felt only warmth as she looked toward her future in the mountains with the man who had saved them both. Tomorrow they would drive up the winding road to the cabin that had become home, where Emma would grow up surrounded by love instead of manipulation, where Sarah could become the mother she wanted to be rather than the daughter her parents had demanded. The Morrison family dynasty would continue, but not in the way Richard and Victoria had planned. It would continue with honesty instead of deception, with love instead of control, with a little girl who would never doubt her worth, because her parents would show her every day that she was valued for exactly who she was. As Emma stirred and opened her dark eyes, Sarah smiled down at her daughter and whispered, "Welcome to your real life, baby girl. It's going to be beautiful." The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows of the expanded cabin, catching dust motes that danced above Emma's high chair as she gleefully smashed banana pieces between her tiny fingers. At 18 months old, she was a force of nature, curious, fearless, and possessed of her mother's stubborn determination. Emma Rose Mitchell, you're supposed to eat the banana, not redecorate the kitchen with it, Sarah laughed, wiping orange mush from her daughter's curls. At 17 now, Sarah moved with the confidence of someone who had found her place in the world. Daniel looked up from the stove where he was flipping pancakes, his eyes crinkling with the kind of deep contentment that had replaced the haunted look he'd carried for so many years. She's an artist, like her mom. Remember that jewelry box you painted last week? That was supposed to be abstract, Sarah protested, but she was smiling. The cabin had grown significantly over the past 2 years. Daniel had added a proper nursery, expanded the kitchen, and built a workshop specifically for Sarah's burgeoning woodworking skills. What had once been a hermit's retreat was now truly a family home, filled with the organized chaos that only a toddler could create. Speaking of art, Daniel said, setting a stack of pancakes on the table, Mrs. Patterson called yesterday. The library wants to display some of your pieces in their summer exhibit. Sarah's face lit up. Really? Which ones? The rocking horse, the children's table set, and that beautiful music box with the dancing figures. Daniel's pride was evident in his voice. She said people have been asking who made them. Mitchell Woodworks is becoming quite the family business, Sarah said, settling Emma in her high chair with a sippy cup. Speaking of which, the order from the Burlington Gallery came in yesterday. They want 12 more of those carved picture frames by Christmas. The success of their expanded business had been one of many surprises in their new life together. Sarah had discovered a natural talent for intricate carving work, while Daniel's larger furniture pieces continued to gain recognition throughout New England. Together, they'd built something neither could have achieved alone. A knock at the front door interrupted their breakfast routine. Daniel frowned. They rarely had unexpected visitors, and most of their friends and customers called ahead. "I'll get it," Sarah said, but Daniel was already moving toward the door. "Stay with Emma," he said quietly, his protective instincts still sharp after 2 years of peace. Through the window, Sarah could see a familiar figure on their porch. Her stomach dropped as she recognized the perfectly styled auburn hair and expensive wool coat. "It's my mother," she called to Daniel, "Victoria." Morrison stood on the doorstep looking older than her 52 years. The past 2 years had not been kind to her. Stress lines creased her forehead, and her usual imperial bearing seemed diminished. She wore her wealth like armor, but it no longer seemed to fit properly. "Victoria," Daniel said neutrally, not moving aside to let her enter. "Mr. Mitchell, may I speak with my daughter, please? That depends on why you're here." Sarah appeared behind Daniel, Emma balanced on her hip. The little girl stared at the stranger with solemn dark eyes, one small fist tangled in her mother's long hair. "Hello, Mother," Sarah said carefully. Victoria's gaze fixed on Emma with hungry intensity. "She's beautiful," she whispered. "She looks just like you did at that age." "What do you want, Victoria?" Daniel's voice carried a warning. "I want to talk to my daughter and meet my granddaughter properly." Victoria's composure wavered slightly. "Please, Sarah, just 5 minutes." Sarah looked at Daniel, reading the concern in his expression. After 2 years of peace, neither of them trusted this sudden appearance. "We can talk on the porch," Sarah said finally. "Daniel, would you take Emma inside?" "Sarah, it's okay. I can handle this." Daniel reluctantly took Emma, who protested the separation with a whimper that made Victoria's face crumple with emotion. "She doesn't know me," Victoria said once they were alone on the porch. "You made that choice when you tried to force me to give her up." Victoria nodded, accepting the rebuke. "I know. I've made many wrong choices, Sarah. That's why I'm here." Sarah studied her mother's face, seeing genuine regret for the first time in their tumultuous relationship. "What's changed?" "Everything." Victoria sat heavily in one of Daniel's handmade rocking chairs, looking suddenly fragile. "Richard and I are getting divorced." Sarah's eyebrows rose. Her parents' marriage had always seemed unshakable, built on shared ambition and social status rather than love, but solid nonetheless. "The recordings Madison made," Victoria continued, "they destroyed more than just Richard's political aspirations." The Connecticut Bar Association launched an investigation. 3 of his major clients dropped the firm when the story broke. "We lost 70% of our business within 6 months." "I'm sorry," Sarah said, and was surprised to find she meant it. "Are you, even after everything we did?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching her breath create small clouds in the crisp morning air. "I'm sorry because I know you're hurting. But I'm not sorry that you faced consequences for your actions." Victoria laughed bitterly. "Consequences? Yes, there have been plenty of those. Richard blames me for pushing too hard, for alienating you when we should have found a way to compromise. I blame him for being too proud to admit when we were wrong." "And what do you blame yourself for?" The question hung in the air between them. Victoria stared out at the snow-covered mountains, her eyes distant with memory. "For forgetting that. Being a mother means loving your child more than you love controlling them," she said finally. "For choosing our reputation over your happiness. For being so afraid of what other people would think that I stopped caring about what you needed." The admission was more honest than Sarah had ever heard from her mother. It cracked something open in her chest that she'd kept carefully guarded. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I want to know my granddaughter," Victoria said simply. "Because I want the chance to be a better grandmother than I was a mother. Because I'm 52 years old and I'm tired of being angry and alone." "Where's Dad in all this?" "Richard moved to Boston 6 months ago. He's trying to rebuild his practice there, though I doubt he'll ever recover fully from the scandal." Victoria's voice held no malice, just exhaustion. "He sends child support for Emma, even though he has no legal obligation. I think it's his way of trying to make amends." Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions, surprise, suspicion, and something that might have been hope. What about Trevor and Madison? "Madison graduates law school next month. She's accepted a position with a firm in Portland. She wanted to be close enough to visit you, but far enough away to avoid our family drama." Victoria smiled slightly. "She's become quite the advocate for children's rights. I think you inspired her." "And Trevor?" Victoria's expression darkened. Trevor is angry. At you for leaving, at me and Richard for driving you away, at the world for being more complicated than he thought. He's 30 now, and he started acting out. Fighting. At school, talking back to teachers. I think he's testing whether we'll abandon him too. Sarah felt a pang of guilt. In her fight for freedom, she'd left her little brother behind with parents who had proven themselves capable of terrible cruelty. Maybe I should call him, Sarah said. He'd like that. He asks about you constantly, whether you're happy, whether Emma is healthy, whether you hate him for not standing up for you sooner. I could never hate Trevor. He was just a kid trying to survive in an impossible situation. Through the window, Sarah could see Daniel entertaining Emma with building blocks, making exaggerated faces that sent the toddler into gales of laughter. The scene filled her with warmth and reminded her how much her life had changed. I need to know, Sarah said carefully, if this is real or if it's another manipulation. Because I won't let you hurt Emma the way you hurt me. Victoria met her daughter's eyes directly. It's real, Sarah. I swear to you, I'm not here to take anything from you or change anything about your life. I just want the chance to be part of it, if you'll let me. What does that look like to you? I don't know. Victoria admitted. Maybe visit, if you're comfortable with that. Maybe phone calls to check on Emma's milestones. Maybe eventually being the kind of grandmother who sends birthday cards and Christmas presents and remembers when she loses her first tooth. The vulnerability in her mother's voice was so unfamiliar that Sarah almost didn't recognize it. This wasn't the imperious Victoria Morrison who commanded charity galas and manipulated family dynamics. This was a broken woman trying to rebuild burned bridges with no guarantee of success. There would have to be conditions, Sarah said. Of course. No gifts that are really bribes. No attempts to undermine Daniel's authority or our family decisions. No discussions about what we're giving up by living here or how Emma would be better off in Greenwich. Victoria nodded. Agreed. And if you ever try to manipulate or threaten any of us again, you're gone. Forever. No second chances. I understand. Sarah looked through the window again, watching Daniel lift Emma high in the air while she squealed with delight. Her daughter's world was filled with unconditional love and acceptance, everything Sarah had longed for as a child. You can come in, Sarah said finally. But Daniel stays with us. I won't be alone with you, and Emma is never out of our sight. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. The introduction was awkward at first. Emma clung to Sarah's leg, studying this new person with the wariness toddlers reserve for strangers. But when Victoria knelt down and began singing a lullaby, Sarah remembered from her own childhood. Emma's curiosity overcame her caution. Hush-a-bye, don't you cry. Go to sleep, my little baby, Victoria sang softly, her voice carrying memories of bedtime stories and gentle touches that Sarah had forgotten. Emma took a tentative step forward, then another, until she was close enough to touch the shiny buttons on Victoria's coat. Pretty, Emma said, her expanding vocabulary still limited but expressive. Yes, they are pretty, Victoria agreed, her voice thick with emotion. Just like you. Daniel watched the interaction with careful eyes, ready to intervene if necessary. But as the morning progressed, Victoria proved herself different from the Kavunva woman who had terrorized them 2 years earlier. She asked permission before holding Emma, respected boundaries when the toddler grew fussy, and made no attempts to override Sarah's parenting decisions. She's very advanced, Victoria observed as Emma successfully stacked 7 blocks before knocking them down with gleeful destruction. Motor skills, vocabulary, problem-solving, she's clearly inherited the family intelligence. She gets that from Daniel too, Sarah said pointedly. He reads to her every night, teaches her about tools and wood grains, and shows her how things work. Victoria glanced at Daniel with something that might have been respectful. You've done well with her. Both of you. The compliment was unexpected. and Sarah felt some of her defensive tension ease. They talked through the morning, sharing stories about Emma's development and milestones Victoria had missed. Sarah found herself telling her mother about Emma's first steps, her first words, the way she laughed at Daniel's silly faces and insisted on helping with woodworking projects. "I have something for you," Victoria said as the visit wound down. She pulled an envelope from her purse, handling it like something precious. "I said no gifts that are bribes," Sarah warned. "It's not a gift, it's something that always belonged to you." Victoria opened the envelope and withdrew a small velvet box. "Your grandmother Rose's engagement ring. I know Daniel hasn't officially proposed yet, but when he does." Sarah opened the box to reveal a delicate antique ring with a modest diamond surrounded by tiny sapphires. It was beautiful in its simplicity, nothing like the ostentatious jewelry the Morrison women usually favored. "Grandmother Rose was the only one in our family who married for love," Victoria said quietly. "She was 19 when she met your grandfather, and her parents disapproved because he was just a schoolteacher. But she chose him anyway, and they had 47 happy years together." Sarah slipped the ring onto her finger, surprised by how perfectly it fit. "Why are you giving this to me now?" "Because you're the first woman in 3 generations to have the courage to choose love over convenience. Because your grandmother would have loved Daniel, and she would have been proud of the life you've built." The gesture was so unexpected, so genuinely thoughtful, that Sarah felt tears threatening. "Thank you," she whispered. As Victoria prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "Sarah, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but would you consider bringing Emma to see Trevor sometime? He's struggling, and I think meeting his niece might remind him that family can be about love instead of obligation." Sarah looked at Daniel, who nodded slightly. "Maybe, when she's a little older and can handle the trip better. I'd be happy to come get you, bring you down and back the same day. Whatever would be most comfortable. We'll think about it." Victoria smiled, the first genuine, uncomplicated smile Sarah could remember seeing from her mother. "That's all I can ask for." After Victoria left, Sarah and Daniel sat together on the porch, Emma napping peacefully in Daniel's arms. The mountain air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of spring. "How do you feel about all that?" Daniel asked. "Confused, hopeful, terrified," Sarah admitted. "What if she reverts back to her old self? What if this is just a more sophisticated manipulation? Then we handle it the same way we've handled everything else, together." Daniel shifted Emma to his shoulder, patting her back gently. "But Sarah, I don't think it was manipulation." She looked broken, like someone who's lost everything and is trying to figure out how to rebuild. "Do you think people can really change that much?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I changed. From a drunk who killed his family to someone worthy of yours. If I can transform that completely, maybe your mother can too." Sarah looked down at her grandmother's ring, catching sunlight in its faceted stone. Daniel about what she said about proposals. "I meant what I said at the hospital," Daniel said quietly. "When you're ready, if you're ready, I want to marry you. Not because we have to, not because of Emma, but because I love you and I want to spend my life showing you what real love looks like." "I'm ready," Sarah said, the words surprising her with their certainty. Daniel's eyes widened. "Really? Really? We've been a family in every way that matters for 2 years. It's time to make it official." Daniel's smile was as brilliant as sunrise. He carefully transferred Emma to Sarah's arms, then dropped to one knee right there on the porch, pulling a simple wooden box from his pocket. "Sarah Elizabeth Morrison," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Will you marry me? Will you let me love you and Emma for the rest of our lives? Will you help me build something beautiful and real and lasting?" "Yes," Sarah laughed, tears streaming down her face. "Yes to all of it." The ring Daniel slipped onto her finger was perfect. handcrafted from mountain silver with a small diamond he'd been saving for months. It nestled perfectly beside her grandmother's ring, old and new together, symbolizing the blend of tradition and transformation that defined their love. Emma woke from her nap just in time to see her parents kissing, and she clapped her chubby hands together in delight, babbling something that sounded remarkably like Mama, Dada. Did she just... Sarah started. I think she did, Daniel grinned, taking Emma back into his arms. What do you think, little girl? Want to be a flower girl? At Mama and Daddy's wedding? Emma's response was to grab Daniel's nose and giggle, which they took as enthusiastic approval. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, Sarah felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. Emma played happily at their feet, babbling to her blocks in the complex language only toddlers understood. Daniel hummed as he chopped vegetables, pausing occasionally to kiss Sarah's temple or ruffle Emma's hair. This was what happiness looked like, not the shallow glamour of her parents' world, but something richer and more substantial. Love built on mutual respect, family created by choice rather than obligation, prosperity measured in laughter, and shared dreams rather than bank balances and social status. The phone rang as they were sitting down to eat, and Sarah recognized Madison's number. Sarah, Madison's voice was bright with excitement. I just got off the phone with Mom. She said she visited you today and that you're engaged. News travels fast in the Morrison family, Sarah laughed. Are you happy? Really, truly happy? Sarah looked around the cabin, at Daniel feeding Emma tiny pieces of bread, at the furniture they'd built together, at the life they'd created from nothing but love and determination. I'm really, truly happy, she said. Happier than I ever thought possible. Good, that's all I ever wanted for you. Madison's voice grew serious. Sarah, I want you to know that what you did, standing up to them, choosing your own path, it changed everything for me too. Watching you fight for your freedom gave me the courage to claim mine. You were always the strong one, Madison. No, I was the careful one. There's a difference. You were the one who was willing to risk everything for what you believed in. That takes real strength. After they hung up, Sarah found herself thinking about the ripple effects of her choices. Her rebellion hadn't just freed her. It had inspired Madison to pursue meaningful work, forced her parents to confront their toxic patterns, and even given Trevor a different model for what family could be. What are you thinking about? Daniel asked, cleaning Emma's face with a warm washcloth. How we got here. All the choices that led to this moment. Sarah gestured around the cabin, encompassing their whole life together. If someone had told me 3 years ago that I'd be living in a mountain cabin with a baby and a man I love, planning a wedding and building furniture for a living, I would have thought they were crazy. And now I can't imagine any other life. Sarah moved to help Daniel with Emma's bedtime routine. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. As they tucked Emma into her crib, she looked up at them with drowsy contentment, surrounded by the wooden toys Daniel had carved and the quilts Sarah had learned to make. Her world was small but infinitely secure, filled with people who loved her unconditionally. Sweet dreams, baby girl, Sarah whispered, kissing her daughter's forehead. Tomorrow we'll build something beautiful together. Later, as Sarah and Daniel sat by the fire planning their simple mountain wedding, snow began to fall outside the windows. But inside the cabin, warmth and love and the promise of tomorrow filled every corner. Sarah Morrison had been cast out of one family only to build a better one. She'd lost the wealth and status that had defined her childhood, only to discover treasures far more valuable: authentic love, genuine respect, and the freedom to become exactly who she was meant to be. The little girl who had once stood shivering on her parents' doorstep, abandoned and alone, was now a woman surrounded by unconditional love. And her daughter would grow up knowing from her very first breath that she was wanted, valued, and cherished exactly as she was out in the mountains of Vermont, 3 lives intertwined in the kind of love that transforms everything it touches. And it was only the beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.